Hi everyone. This slideshow is going to quickly present the elements of fiction. I'm going to have a slide of the element and then quickly discuss it. And I will try to be as quick as possible. And hopefully you have already read the book outlining these elements. So what is the plot? Aristotle defines the plot as the beginning, the middle, and the end of a story. Now, today, in contemporary terms, we have a few more categories to the beginning, middle, and the end. But in general, that's what the story is. There is something going on at the beginning, something's happening in the middle, and then ultimately there's a resolution in the end. Okay, but the plot of the story is arrangements of events that make up a story. There is usually a conflict that represents a struggle between the opposing forces, usually the protagonist and the antagonist. There's exposition, which provides the background information, the description. The plot usually presents complications that create conflict, something that causes the characters to think or something that they have to fight against. There's usually a climax, which is the turning point, and ultimately the climax gets resolved. So you want to think of the plot as going up a hill. You start the story at the bottom of the hill. The characters have to walk up the hill, and then the characters are somehow being challenged. And then they have to get to the top of the hill, and then they finally get to that climax, and they get to come back down, and there's a resolution at the end. Here is a nice diagram that helps outline what a plot looks like. Okay, there's the exposition, the description at the beginning, the rising action, the events of the story that are causing complications, and ultimately we're going up to that climax, that big thing towards the end of the story that changes everything, the turning point. Then we have the falling action, so we're heading towards the conclusion, and then there's some sort of resolution. There is sort of an epiphany, or knowledge is gained, or there is an actual change in the character's position. Okay, so I recommend stopping this slide and just kind of taking a look at the diagram. A lot of great writers will argue that a story is nothing without character. It has to have a compelling character or characters. All right, the protagonist is the main character, the hero, and the antagonist is the person who opposes the hero, the adversary of that hero. Okay, now sometimes the antagonist does not necessarily even have to be a person. An antagonist can be nature, could be some sort of elemental part of the world, weather, something like that. So you just want to think about who is the story talking about and who is opposing that character, who is trying to block that character from moving forward. There are major versus minor characters, right? Usually a story is about one person, not always, but usually. And then there are sort of other characters that help move that story along, that help build that character, help us understand that character. And those characters would be referred to as minor characters. The setting is considered the place of the story. It's the location where the events are taking place. Eudora Welty, a very famous American storyteller, once said that fiction depends for its life on place. Now, what does that mean? It means that a story has to occur somewhere, and that place, that location, helps make that story alive. It helps present the meaning. The characters have to be somewhere. Things have to be happening somewhere. So the location really is indicative of the meaning of the story. It is symbolizing something. And some may argue that it really helps symbolize the emotional state of the characters. Okay, so when you read the setting, and I'm going to argue that the setting usually, not always, but usually appears at the beginning of a story. Really stop and think, okay, where is the setup of the story? Is it taking place in a city or in the country? Are there lots of people or few people? What's going on in nature? Okay, all of these things will help set up, most likely, what's going to happen in the story, like a foreshadow, or the feeling or mood of the story. So make sure you really pay attention to the setting of a story. I suggest thinking of point of view as the voice of the story, because this is how is the narrator being presented, right? How is the voice? Is the voice objective, first person, third person, omniscient, or limited omniscient? An objective point of view is completely detached, and the narrator is just kind of spelling out events. The first person narration is the I, me, me. The third person is the he, she, and that you do get thoughts and feelings of a character. The omniscient point of view, one way to consider it is kind of like that godlike narrator. You want to think of like a narrator up in the sky looking down at the characters and just telling us what's going on, and that omniscient narrator knows all feelings and thoughts of all the characters. Limited omniscient is when the narrator sees all and knows all and presents us with limited amounts of feelings and emotions from various characters. Okay? Now, our book does a nice job of trying to remind us of the importance of point of view and how we have to consider how point of view affects our responses to the characters. All right, always remember that a first-person narrative is not always reliable. Okay, and a great example of that is the short story, The Yellow Wallpaper. The narrator is essentially going crazy, and as you read, you start to feel like you're going crazy, and that shows the power of point of view. That the way the voice is being told, the way you're hearing and seeing the story is affecting how you see the story. So always remember the power of point of view and the power of the voice of the story. The language and style of a story really depends upon the author, because the language and style is dictated by the author's choice of words, syntax, and figures of speech. So do we have an author that loves metaphor? Do we have an author that abhors adjectives? Right? So what is the author's choice in language? How does that author present his or her sentences? And all of that helps contribute to the meaning of the story, how the story is being presented. Are the sentences long and luxurious, or are they short and clipped? Or do we have long paragraphs or short paragraphs? What kind of devices are being used? Does an author sometimes use alliteration? What does that mean? So always think about what kind of style the author has. And yes, time period when the author is writing does kind of dictate that style. Writers in the 1800s have a definitely different style than the writers of the 20th century. Okay, so that, yes, historically that does come into play. But even if you take out the history for a second and you just simply look at the words being used, what do the words literally mean? What do they imply, and why are they important? Why does the author choose to arrange his or her words in that way? Why does the author choose to present the story in a specific pattern? Okay, that's language and style. Theme. The theme is the idea or the point of the story. It is always important to remember that the theme of the story is rarely overtly presented. Theme is never just spelled out in a sentence. This story is about. Okay? Theme is derived from its details of character, plot, setting, structure, language, and point of view. A lot of students think that when I ask a question about what is the theme of the story, that I'm just asking what the story is about. And that's the starting point. So if a story is about love, I want to hear, what is it saying about love? Is it saying that love is dangerous? Is it saying that love is complicated? Is it saying that love is painful? Or is it saying that love is so joyous that no one should ever feel it? Okay? What is it saying about the theme? And so then you have to go into the character, the plot, the setting, any of the other elements of fiction, and describe how the theme is being presented. Because remember, the theme is that initial idea, love, hate, revenge. But as an English teacher, we want to know what the story is saying about the theme. Okay, always remember that. Identifying the theme is the first step. And then you need to go into the story and ask, okay, well, what is the author saying about that theme? And how are the elements of fiction being used to convey that meaning about the theme? Irony. So what is irony? Irony is when there's an expectation and that expectation is overturned, is not met. Okay? So an example of irony would be if a fire station were on fire. Why is that ironic? Because we expect a firehouse to be a place that puts out fires. So it's completely ironic that a place that's supposed to be safe from fire would be on fire. Okay? So remember that irony always involves a contrast or a discrepancy between one thing and another. All right? Now, how does it appear? It appears in three ways. It can appear in the work's language, its incidents, or in its point of view. Okay? So when you're looking for irony, you're looking for it in the language of the story, in the plot, and in the narrator's point of view. All right, what is symbolism? A symbol is when it means more than just the literal significance. Okay, so a flower is literally a plant that might or might not smell good. So if it's used as a symbol, what is it symbolizing? Is it symbolizing childhood? Is it symbolizing rebirth? Is it symbolizing love? Okay? Symbols are objects, actions, or events that convey meaning and convey more than one thing. Okay? So a symbol, a lot of different things can be symbols. A cup could be a symbol. A glass of wine could be a symbol. All right? A baby could be a symbol. Symbols are everywhere. All right, they're in your life right now. Something that means something else beyond the literal. So start looking for symbols just in everyday life. That's what I suggest. That'll help you with actual literature. So I have a section of Girl by Jamaica Kincaid on this slide. And I highly recommend stopping this PowerPoint and reading the short story before you proceed. Okay, I need you to come up with your own opinions about the story before you hear some of my opinions. Okay, so pause the PowerPoint right now. Okay, so once you've read the story, you need to ask yourself a series of questions. What is the plot? Who are the characters? What is the setting? What is the point of view? What is the language and style? What is the theme? What are the symbols? And is there any irony? Now, it's just important to ask yourself these questions and come up with some answers. Now, when you read a story too, it's important to focus on the element that you think the author uses in a unique way, because that really says something about the story. Now, one thing that strikes me about Girl by Jamaica Kincaid is the style. Okay? The style of the story. It's basically one long sentence. We have compound sentences, semicolon after semicolon after semicolon. It's one block of text. Now, why on earth would Jamaica Kincaid do this? Well, for me, when I'm reading this and I'm not allowed to stop a full stop at a period, I have to keep going. I can barely catch my breath. And that's how the girl, the young girl in the story must feel. She is being told to do all of these things. She's being overwhelmed with commands. So what an interesting stylistic choice by Kincaid. She is using the style of the story, she's using grammar to make the reader feel what the young girl must be feeling. Now that's pretty amazing. Another stylistic technique that Kincaid uses is that the little girl speaks to her mother twice. And when she does, the spoken words are in italics. They are not in quotation marks. Now you have to ask yourself why. Why on earth would there be no quotation marks for dialogue? Well, I think that because this short story is a list of commands, overwhelming orders by the mother, and you could even argue by society on a woman, having quotation marks would disrupt that flow, right? And we want to continue that feeling of being overwhelmed and burdened by all of the dictated norms being placed on women. Now, another stylistic technique is how we figure out the setting of the story. We do not have a paragraph of description telling us where and when this story takes place, but we do have word choice that helps us understand where the story takes place. We have the word Bena. Now, what is Bena? Bena is calypso music, and calypso music is found in the Caribbean islands. We also have food like okra. We have pepper pots. All right, these are sort of indicative of a Caribbean island. Now, we don't know what Caribbean island, and I don't even think it's fair to venture to guess a specific Caribbean island. We just know we're in the South, and we're in some sort of Caribbean island. Now, all of this information has come from style and language. So that's interesting. The theme of the story can be extracted from the style and language of Jamaica Kincaid. This story is about rules and regulations of women, of the demands that are placed on a woman, and a woman is overwhelmed and sort of unable to come up for air because so much is expected of her. Now, I suggest going back in the story. Is there a plot? And who are the characters? Is there another theme that you see? Remember, there is no one interpretation of a story. A story can mean many things to many different people. All you as a reader have to do is prove how the story means what you think it means. So specifically, what element of fiction is being used to convey what you think the story means.